There are aberrations that aren't fantasies, that are literally part of your daily life. They sit beside you, call themselves family, and use the respect they've earned in the community as a shield for their evil deeds and atrocities. My name is Teresa Oliver, and today, at 75 years old, I've finally found the courage to tell what happened in that wooden house where I grew up. This story has been stuck in my throat for more than 6 decades, like a thorn I could never remove. Before I begin, I want to thank you for listening. If you can, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It gives me strength to continue telling this story that weighs so heavily. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know who the brave souls are joining me on this difficult journey. I was born and raised in rural Virginia, in a small town with one church, a central square, and dirt roads that turned to mud when it rained hard. It was the early 1960s, a time when a child's word meant nothing, and a respected man was one everyone greeted in the square after Sunday service. Our house was a bit removed from town, a simple timber frame structure my father Joseph built with his own hands. He was a carpenter, working from dawn till dusk, building furniture and houses for the landowners in the region. A quiet man of few words, but with a look that said everything. When he looked at me and my siblings, his eyes, though tired from labor, always had a gleam of pride. My mother, Mary, was a seamstress who spent her days bent over that Singer sewing machine she treasured. She made everything from party dresses to work clothes for the farm hands. A strong woman who woke before everyone else and was always the last to bed. Even exhausted, she never failed to tell us stories before we slept. We were a simple family, but we never lacked food. We had a garden in the back that my mother tended lovingly, some chickens that provided fresh eggs, and even a pig that was fattened for Christmas. I was the oldest of 3 siblings. After me came Michael, 2 years younger, and Josephine, who had just turned 6. Our life was peaceful until one afternoon in March 1962, when my mother's father, my maternal grandfather Gerald, arrived at our door. I remember it like it was yesterday. He appeared with a worn leather suitcase in hand, a tattered hat on his head, and that hand-rolled tobacco smell that permeated his clothes. "I've come to stay with you for a while," he said without asking permission, already placing his suitcase in the back room as if he'd already decided that would be his place. My mother turned pale when she saw him on the doorstep. The two hadn't spoken for years, since Grandma passed away. But back then, a daughter didn't question her father, even when she was a grown woman with her own family. That same night, after they thought I was asleep, I heard my mother arguing with my father in their room. The walls of our house were thin, and their voices, though contained, reached me. "He can't stay, Joseph. You know what he's like. He's your father, Mary. He was never a real father. He treated my mother worse than a dog, drank away all the money he earned, and still," her voice broke, "you know what he did when he was drinking. He's old now, Mary. He's sick. Where will he go if not here? I'm afraid for the children, Joseph. Especially for Teresa. She's becoming a young lady." That conversation left me uneasy. What did my mother mean? Why would she be afraid for me? At that age, I still didn't understand certain things, but something inside me, an instinct perhaps, already warned me that my grandfather's arrival wasn't good news. In the first few days, Grandpa Gerald behaved himself. He spent most of his time sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, smoking his hand-rolled cigarettes and observing the movement with those small, sharp eyes that seemed to see through people. Sometimes he caught me looking at him and smiled in a way that gave me chills. He was a man of medium height, but seemed to occupy more space than he really had. His hands were large and rough, with yellowed fingernails from tobacco. He had a grayish mustache, always poorly trimmed, and a hoarse laugh that sounded more like a growl. My mother avoided being alone with him. I noticed this in the first few days. She always found an excuse to take me along when she needed to serve him food or bring clean clothes, and she instructed me never, under any circumstances, to be alone with Grandpa. "He's sick, Teresa," she would say, without explaining what illness it was. "He can't be trusted." Time passed, and my grandfather's behavior began to change. At first, it was small things, a complaint about the food, cursing when someone made noise while he was trying to sleep. Then came the drinking. He hid bottles of moonshine under his bed, thinking no one knew, but the smell gave him away. When he drank, he transformed. His eyes would turn red, his tongue sharper. He'd start telling inappropriate stories during dinner, make comments about my mother's body, look at me in a way that made me want to disappear. My father, always so patient, began to lose his temper. "Respect this house, Gerald," he would say firmly. "We have children here." Grandpa would just laugh in that mocking way. "You think you're in charge of something, Joseph? Mary is my daughter before she's your wife." These arguments became more frequent. The tension in our house was palpable, like we were living on a powder keg about to explode. My father, always so calm and controlled, now came home with tense shoulders, watchful eyes. On a particularly hot summer night, what my mother feared most occurred. It was January 1963. I remember well because it was shortly before my 13th birthday. My father had gone to the neighboring town to pick up lumber for a special order. My mother took advantage to go with him and do some shopping that she couldn't do in our town. They left my grandfather in charge of the house and us children, despite my mother's evident reluctance. "I'll be back before dark," she promised, hugging me tightly before leaving. "Take care of your siblings and don't listen to your grandfather." Michael and Josephine were playing in the backyard that afternoon. I was in the kitchen preparing a cake following a recipe my mother had taught me. It was a way to distract myself and to show my mother when she returned that I could help more around the house. I didn't notice when my grandfather entered the kitchen. I only felt when he approached from behind, his smell of cigarettes and moonshine invading my nostrils before his hands even touched my shoulders. "How pretty you look, Teresa," he said with that pastiness of drunks. "You're turning into a little woman." I tried to move away, remembering my mother's warnings, but he held my arm firmly. "Where do you think you're going?" "I'm just talking with my favorite granddaughter." His hot, sour breath was getting closer to my face. I felt my heart race with fear. At that moment, I knew what my mother had feared so much. "I need to check on my siblings. I'm going," I tried to say, but my voice came out weak, trembling. "They're fine out there," he responded, his rough hand now sliding up my arm in a way that made me nauseous. "Come here. I want to show you something in my room." I felt a panic I had never felt before. I knew deep in my soul that I shouldn't go with him to that back room, that I should run, scream, do anything but stay there. But he was strong, much stronger than me, and he was between me and the kitchen door. And if I screamed, my siblings might come to see what was happening. And something told me I didn't want them to witness whatever was about to happen. "I need to finish the cake. I'm going," I tried once more, looking for any excuse. "Mother will be angry if it's not ready when she returns." He laughed in that way that chilled my spine. "Your mother and father won't be back until night, girl. We have plenty of time." It was then that I heard the most blessed sound I could have imagined at that moment. Wagon wheels entering our yard. My grandfather heard it too, and loosened his grip on my arm, looking confused at the kitchen window. "They're not supposed to be back now," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I took advantage of that moment of distraction to break free and run to the front door. When I opened it, I saw my father's wagon stopped there, my father getting down with a worried expression on his face. "Dad!" I cried, and couldn't contain the tears that came from a deep place inside me. He looked at me, looked behind me where my grandfather now appeared in the kitchen doorway, and something in his eyes changed. I saw there a contained fury that I had never witnessed before. "What happened, Teresa?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, but with an intensity that left no doubt about what he was thinking. Before I could answer, my grandfather stepped forward, already trying to fix the situation. "Nothing happened, Joseph. The girl is too nervous, just like her mother." It was then that I noticed my mother wasn't in the wagon. "Where's Mom?" I asked, confused. "Your mother stayed in town with Mrs. Margaret. She had some fabrics to choose," my father explained, his eyes never leaving my grandfather. "I forgot a tool and came back to get it." What seemed like a common forgetfulness, today I know was God's hand intervening in my favor. My father, always methodical and careful with his tools, never forgot them. Something made him come back at that exact moment, as if an intuition had alerted him. "Go check on your siblings, Teresa," my father directed me, already walking toward my grandfather. "Your grandfather and I need to talk." I ran to the backyard, my heart still beating erratically. I found Michael and Josephine playing carefree, unaware of what had almost happened in the kitchen. I I kept them there, inventing games to distract them, while I strained my ears to try to hear what was happening inside the house. The voices were muffled by the distance, but I could feel that the conversation was tense. At one point, I heard something breaking, maybe a plate or a glass, followed by a heavy silence. Only much later, when I was already an adult, did my mother tell me what happened in that kitchen. My father, that man of few words but unshakable principles, confronted my grandfather about what he had witnessed, or almost witnessed. My grandfather, already drunk and arrogant as always, made the mistake of suggesting that I, a girl of almost 13, was provoking him. That was the last straw. My father, who had never raised his hand to anyone, saw red at that sordid accusation. The argument escalated quickly, and when my grandfather tried to come at him, my father reacted in self-defense. There were no screams, no scandal. When I returned to the kitchen some time later, everything seemed normal, except for my grandfather's absence. "Where's Grandpa?" I asked, confused. "Your grandfather had to leave," my father answered simply, washing his hands in the kitchen sink. I noticed that his knuckles were red, but I didn't comment. "He's not going to live with us anymore." When my mother returned at the end of that afternoon, she and my father had a long, closed-door conversation. I didn't hear what they said, but when they came out of the room, my mother had eyes red from crying, and my father was embracing her with silent tenderness. That night, she came to my bed and sat on the edge. "Did something happen with your grandfather today, daughter?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I told her, with the hesitant words of a child, what had happened in the kitchen. How he had held me, the things he had said, the fear I felt. She listened to everything in silence, silent tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she hugged me for a long time. "Forgive me, daughter," she whispered. "I should have protected you better. I should have prevented him from staying here." "It's not your fault, Mom," I replied, feeling that somehow the roles had reversed in that moment. I, still a child, consoling my adult mother. "Your father took care of everything," she said finally, wiping away her tears. "Your grandfather will never again set foot in this house, never again hurt anyone in our family." As a child at that time, I accepted that explanation without questioning too much. I was relieved to know that my grandfather had gone, that the shadow he cast over our house had dissipated. It was only many years later, already an adult, that I began to piece together what really happened that January afternoon in 1963. The sudden absence of my grandfather, the different behavior of my parents in the weeks that followed, the glances exchanged between them when someone asked about Gerald, and especially the unexpected trip we took shortly afterward to the other side of the state, where we ended up restarting our lives in a town where no one knew us. The shadow of my grandfather Gerald never again darkened our house. But what happened that afternoon marked our family forever, in ways that I only fully understood when I had my own children to protect. After that incident in the kitchen, our family entered a state of silent alertness that only those who have experienced something similar can understand. It was as if we were all walking on eggshells, measuring words, exchanging glances, loaded with meanings that a girl of almost 13 couldn't fully decipher. In the weeks following my grandfather's sudden departure, I noticed subtle changes in my parents' behavior. Mom, always so strong and decisive, now startled at any unexpected noise. At night, I would hear her cry softly in the bedroom when she thought we were all asleep. Dad, in turn, began to arrive earlier from the carpentry shop, locked the doors and windows as soon as the sun set, and made rounds of the house before going to bed. It was February 1963, and the suffocating heat of that summer seemed to amplify the tension hanging over us. The windows that used to stay open to catch any breeze now remained closed, increasing the stuffiness inside the house. "It's better this way, Teresa," Mom would explain when I complained. "We don't want anyone looking into our lives." One morning, I was hanging clothes on the line in the back when I heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. I approached stealthily to the window to listen to the conversation, a practice I had perfected since my grandfather arrived at our house. "The sheriff was at the store yesterday, Mary." My father's voice sounded worried. "Asked questions about Gerald. Someone noticed his absence." "And what did you say?" my mother asked, her voice almost gone. "That he decided to return to Richmond to live with Tommy, his brother. But my brother doesn't even know my father was here. If the sheriff decides to investigate, "He won't investigate," my father interrupted firmly. "Who's going to care about an old drunk who disappeared? He wasn't even from here." Those words danced in my head. He won't investigate. But then why all this worry? The apprehensive looks, the whispered conversations, the locked doors. It was on this same day that I saw Mom burning my grandfather's clothes in the backyard, clothes he had left behind when he departed. A shabby suit jacket, 2 yellowed shirts, a pair of pants with patches on the knees. She threw the pieces one by one into the small fire she had lit, watching them twist in the flames with an expression that mixed relief and anguish. "Why are you burning Grandpa's things, Mom?" I asked, stopping beside her. She startled, as if my presence had yanked her from a deep trance. "These clothes are too old to donate, Teresa, and your grandfather won't need them where he is now." There was something in the way she said those words that sent a chill through me. "Where is he?" I insisted. Mom remained silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the flames that devoured the last vestige of my grandfather's presence. "In a place where he can no longer hurt anyone," she finally answered. "In the days that followed, I tried to act normally. I continued helping with household chores, taking care of my siblings, attending school when possible, but I felt a weight in my stomach, a restlessness I couldn't name. My mother's words echoed in my head. In a place where he can no longer hurt anyone." One afternoon, as I was returning from school with Michael, we passed by Mr. Jenkins's store, the only commerce in our small town. Some men were gathered on the porch, talking in low voices, but fell silent when they saw us approaching. "Those are Joseph the carpenter's children," one of them commented, thinking we couldn't hear. "The son-in-law of that old man who disappeared. They say he returned to his homeland." Another responded, "But Muddy Joe swears he saw Joseph digging a big hole in the back of his property that same night the old man disappeared." "Shut up, Sebastian," a third man reprimanded him. "There are children listening." I gripped Michael's hand firmly and quickened my pace, my heart beating so hard it seemed like it would leap out of my chest. Those insinuations, added to my parents' strange behavior, were beginning to form a picture that my young mind was reluctant to accept. That night, when everyone was already sleeping, I sneaked out to the backyard. The full moon illuminated the terrain with an almost supernatural clarity, allowing me to see the path without needing a lantern. I headed towards the back of the property, where the small orange grove my father cultivated with such pride was located. It was there that we had buried our dog, Toto, when he died run over the previous year. And it was there that I noticed something different. An area where the earth seemed to have been recently disturbed, now covered with dry leaves carefully arranged to disguise the disturbance. I stood there, staring at that piece of ground, a chill running up my spine. "Teresa!" My father's voice cut through the night silence, making me jump with fright. He was standing a few meters away, his expression illegible under the silvery light of the moon. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" I couldn't sleep," I stammered, suddenly aware of how suspicious that situation seemed. My father approached slowly, his eyes alternating between me and the disturbed piece of earth I was observing. When he got close enough, he put his hand on my shoulder. "What do you think happened to your grandfather, Teresa?" he asked with a gentleness that contrasted with the evident tension in his face. The question caught me off guard. I swallowed hard, uncertain of how to respond. Part of me wanted to lie, to say I believed the story about the trip to Richmond, but something in my father's eyes, a vulnerability I had never seen before, made me opt for the truth. "I think he didn't really leave," I replied, my voice almost disappearing. "I think he's there." I pointed to the piece of earth. My father remained silent for a long moment, as if pondering how much he could or should tell me. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh and squeezed my shoulder harder. "Come with me," he said, guiding me back to the house. Instead of taking me inside, we sat on the porch steps. The night was warm, and the crickets sang in the nearby bushes. My father lit a hand-rolled cigarette, something he rarely did, and took a long drag before he began to speak. "There are things that happen in families that we prefer not to talk about, Teresa. Things that are better buried." He paused, looking at the small embers of the cigarette. "Your grandfather wasn't a good man. He hurt many people throughout his life. Your grandmother, your mother, and he almost hurt you." I nodded in silence, my eyes fixed on my hands clasped in my lap. That day, he continued, when I returned and saw the way you were, the way he was looking at you, something inside me broke. We always knew what he was capable of, but your mother insisted on giving him a chance. She always had that kindness that sometimes borders on foolishness. What happened in the kitchen after you sent me out? I asked, gathering courage. My father took another drag, his gaze lost in the shadows of the yard. We argued. He said things, horrible things about you, about your mother. Things a man can't hear about his family and stand still. He tried to hit me with a moonshine bottle. I defended myself. A heavy silence fell between us, loaded with unspoken meanings. It was an accident, my father finally said. But there was something in his voice that made me doubt. He fell and hit his head on the corner of the stove. When I saw that he wasn't moving anymore, I knew it was over. I absorbed those words, trying to reconcile the image of my father, always so correct, so fair, with the idea that he had taken a life, even if accidentally. Your mother returned soon after, he continued. I told her everything. I thought she would be horrified, that she would report me. But you know what she did? I shook my head, unable to imagine my mother's reaction to such a revelation. She said, Joseph, you did what needed to be done. He won't hurt anyone in our family anymore. My father gave a small, sad smile, and then she helped me clean everything up. Together we decided what to do. In that moment, I understood that my parents' love for each other and for us children was stronger and more complex than I could ever have imagined. They had done the unthinkable to protect us. No one will believe it was an accident, my mother said, entering the porch. I hadn't realized she was listening to our conversation. He was your father-in-law, Joseph. They'll say you planned this. She sat beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders. The familiar smell of the soap she used brought me a momentary feeling of comfort. We can't let them take you, she continued, looking at my father with a fierce determination in her eyes. The children need their father. I need my husband. Is that why you lied about him going to Richmond? I asked, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. My parents exchanged a quick glance. It was the only way out we saw, daughter, my mother explained. Your father acted to protect us. If the police found out, they wouldn't believe it was self-defense. You know how justice is for simple people like us. I knew. In our community, the law rarely favored people like my parents, workers without money or influence. A man like my father, accused of killing his own father-in-law, would face all the severity of a system that wasn't interested in hearing about mitigating circumstances or self-defense. But now people are talking, I continued. I heard the men at the store today. They're suspicious? The worry returned to my parents' faces, more intense than before. We have to leave here, my father decided after a moment of reflection. Go somewhere where no one knows us, where we can start over. Leave everything behind? The house you built with your own hands? Your carpentry shop? My mother seemed devastated despite her earlier determination. What is a house, Mary, compared to our family? What are tools, furniture, if I lose you? He extended his hand to hold hers. Let's go to Chicago. I have a cousin there who can help us start over. Chicago, the big city we only knew from stories. A place so distant and different from our peaceful reality that it seemed like another country. And the school? The children's friends? My mother was still trying to process such a big change. They'll have new schools, new friends, my father replied. The important thing is that we're together and safe. That night, sitting on the porch steps between my parents, I understood the weight of the secret we now shared. I understood the sacrifice they were willing to make to keep our family together. And for the first time, I glimpsed the complexity of the adult world, where sometimes the choices aren't between right and wrong, but between different forms of wrong, and you choose the one you can live with. What do I tell my siblings? I asked suddenly, aware of the responsibility I had just assumed. For now, nothing, my father replied. When the time comes, we'll explain the move in the best way possible. They're young, they'll adapt more easily. And you, Teresa, my mother added, holding my face between her hands. We'll have to grow up faster than we'd like. This secret is a heavy burden for a girl your age, but we trust you. That trust weighed more than any responsibility that had ever been placed on my shoulders. But somehow, it also made me feel stronger. My parents needed me as much as I needed them. I won't tell anyone, I promised, my voice firmer than I felt inside. Ever. And so, under the silvery light of the moon and the incessant song of the crickets, our family forged a silent pact, an agreement sealed not with signatures, but with the mutual understanding that from that moment on, we shared much more than a name or a roof. We shared a secret that would bind us together forever. 2 weeks later, with only what we could carry in 2 large suitcases and some boxes, we left for Chicago. We left behind not only a house and material possessions, but also the body of a man who, even in death, continued to cast a shadow over our lives. A man whose name we would rarely pronounce in the years to come, but whose ghostly presence would never completely abandon us. The journey to Chicago on that old, noisy bus marked the end of one chapter of our lives and the beginning of another. One in which we would learn to live not only with absence, but also with the weight of a secret that, at the time, seemed too big to fit within the limits of my understanding as a girl. Chicago received us with its intimidating immensity in March 1963. For a rural family, the Windy City seemed like a completely different world. The skyscrapers that scratched the sky, the incessant noise, the crowd of hurried strangers in the streets. Our arrival coincided with a period of great transformations in America. The country was breathing the last gasps of a movement toward equality that, although we didn't know it at the time, would be marked by the assassination of a president later that year. My father's cousin, Anthony, welcomed us into his home in the back of the Yards neighborhood, where many migrants like us sought opportunities. It was a simple house, squeezed between identical ones on a narrow street, but for us, it represented a new beginning. "You can stay as long as you need," Anthony said, helping my father unload our few suitcases. "I know how hard it is to start from scratch," and it was. Despite his skill as a carpenter, my father faced difficulties finding work. The city demanded specializations he didn't have, references he couldn't provide, documents that would explain the past we were trying to leave behind. "Your work record is clean, Joseph," commented a potential employer, "but there's no record at all. How has a man your age never worked formally? In the countryside, signed contracts and work permits were rarities. Businesses were closed with a handshake. Payments were made in cash, without receipts or proof. This informality that worked in the countryside became an obstacle in the city. After weeks of closed doors, my father finally got a job as a helper in a furniture workshop in Bridgeport. The salary was less than he deserved, but he accepted without hesitation. "It's enough to start," he told my mother. "The important thing is to have honest work." The word honest weighed in his speech. Since the incident with my grandfather, I noticed how my father seemed to carry an almost painful need to prove his integrity to the world, to us, and especially to himself. My mother also found work sewing for a small clothing shop. She left early and returned late, her fingers marked by pinpricks, her eyes tired from straining under weak lights. Despite the exhaustion, she always found energy to care for us and the house. I, at 13, took on even more responsibilities. Enrolled in a local public school, I divided my time between studies and caring for my siblings. Michael, then 11, adapted quickly to the new life. Josephine, only 7, would sometimes wake up crying, asking when we would return home. "This is our home now, dear," I would explain, hugging her until she fell back asleep. What I didn't say was that we would never return, that this move wasn't temporary, that we were fleeing not just from a place but from a past that would haunt us forever. Our first months in Chicago were of adjustments and difficulties. Money was tight. Homesickness for the countryside squeezed our chests. The fear of being discovered hung in the air like a storm cloud. But there were also small joys, moments of hope. A Sunday in Grant Park, a movie at the street cinema, the first time my father received a compliment from the furniture shop owner. It was in August of that year, when we were getting used to the new life, that the past caught up with us. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was washing clothes in the shared yard with other families when Anthony appeared with a worried expression. "Where is your father, Teresa?" he asked, his voice low so the neighbors wouldn't hear. "At the market with Mom," I replied, noticing his nervousness. "What happened?" He looked around, making sure we were alone. "There's a man asking about you all down at the Greek store. A guy in a suit who's not from here. Says he's a Chicago detective, but I have my doubts. My heart raced. The possibility that they had found us, that the secret we guarded so carefully had been discovered, left me paralyzed with fear. What did he want to know? I stammered. Questions about the family that recently came from the countryside. Wanted to know where you live, what your father does, how long you've been here. Anthony scratched his chin thoughtfully. I didn't like the look of him, Teresa. Said I didn't know any new family in the neighborhood. I immediately abandoned the laundry and ran to the room I shared with Josephine. Under the thin mattress, I kept a crumpled piece of paper with the address of a man named Jenkins. Not the store owner from our town, but a friend of my father's in Richmond who promised to help us if we ever needed. Are you going out, Teresa? Michael asked, appearing at the room door while I tucked the paper into my dress pocket. I need to find Dad and Mom at the market, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. Stay with Josephine. Don't let her leave until I get back. I ran through the narrow streets of back of the yards, bumping into people, apologizing without stopping to hear responses. The market was 6 blocks away, and the noise of vendors announcing their merchandise guided me there. I found my parents at the vegetable stand, Mom examining tomatoes while Dad held a bag already half full. The scene was so common, so normal, that for an instant I hesitated to break that moment of peace with more news. Dad, I called, approaching breathlessly. I need to talk to you now. Something in my tone must have communicated the urgency, because my father immediately handed the bag to my mother and led me away from the crowd. I told him about the man searching for us, repeating Anthony's words exactly. My father's face paled. Are you sure he said he was a detective, Teresa? That's what Anthony said, but he thinks the man was lying. My parents exchanged glances. There was a silent communication between them, developed over the years, that I still couldn't fully decipher. We're not going back home right now, my father decided. Let's go to the church. No one will look for us there on a Saturday afternoon. St. Joseph's Church, a few blocks away, offered the refuge we needed. We sat in one of the last pews, pretending to pray while discussing our situation in whispers. It could just be a coincidence, my mother suggested, though her tone didn't carry much conviction. Maybe he really is a detective doing some kind of neighborhood survey. I don't believe in coincidences, Mary, my father replied, running his hand over his tired face. If they discovered something about what happened, they won't stop until they find us. What are we going to do then? I asked, fear growing inside me. My father remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the altar where the image of Christ seemed to observe our dilemma with compassion. We have 2 options, he finally said. Run again, further this time, or face whatever comes. Run where, Joseph? My mother questioned. We're already far from everything we knew. How much further would we have to go, and with what money? She was right. Our financial situation was still precarious. We could barely pay the rent for the small room in Anthony's house. The idea of a new move, of starting over from zero once more, seemed impossible. Then we face it, my father concluded, a somber determination in his voice. If they come for me, you'll say you knew nothing, that you believed the story about the trip to Richmond, that you never suspected. No! I exclaimed louder than intended, attracting disapproving looks from a lady praying a few pews ahead. I won't lie like that, I continued in a lower voice. Teresa, my father held my hands between his. If necessary, that's exactly what you'll do. For your mother, for your siblings, a family without a father is already difficult. Without a father, and with the mother imprisoned as an accomplice, would be unbearable. The tears I was trying to contain finally rolled down my face. But you didn't do anything wrong, Dad. It was defense. He wanted to hurt me. Justice doesn't always see things as they really are, daughter, my father replied with a sad smile. Especially for people like us. We left the church when the sun was already setting, spreading orange tones across the Chicago sky. We walked not to Anthony's house, but to a small hotel near Union Station, where my father paid for a room using almost all the money we had saved. We'll stay here tonight, he explained. Tomorrow, if there's no danger, we'll return. If there is, he didn't complete the sentence, but we all knew what it meant. If there was danger, my mother, my siblings, and I would leave, perhaps to Richmond to look for that Jenkins, while my father would stay and face the consequences of what he had done. The room was small, with a double bed where my parents would sleep and a mattress on the floor for us children. Michael and Josephine, confused by the sudden change of plans, fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's emotions. I, however, remained awake, pretending to sleep while watching my parents talking in whispers by the window. "If they take me, Mary, don't tell the children the truth," my father was pleading. "Say I went away on business, that I'll be back soon. When they're older, perhaps." "Don't talk like that, Joseph," my mother interrupted him, her voice breaking. "No one is going to take you anywhere. What you did for us, to protect your family. You have no guilt in this." "But I do, Mary," my father responded, so low I could barely hear. "I do have guilt." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I held my breath, trying not to make any movement that would reveal I was awake. "What do you mean?" my mother asked, the same confusion I felt evident in her voice. When I came back that day and saw how he was with Teresa, something inside me broke. We argued, yes. He tried to hit me with the bottle, that's true, but when he fell, when I saw him on the floor, still breathing, my father paused, and even in the dimness of the room, I could see how his shoulders trembled. "I could have called for help, Mary. Could have taken him to the hospital in St. Lucia, but I didn't. I stood watching him bleed out, thinking of everything he had done to you in your childhood, everything he almost did to our daughter, and I did nothing." A heavy silence followed that confession. My mind was trying to process what I had just heard. My father, the most honest and upright man I knew, admitting that he had let my grandfather die when he could have saved him. It wasn't direct murder, but neither was it the accident he had described. "I forgave my father for everything he did to me, Joseph," my mother finally responded. "I forgave because I thought it was the right thing to do, that God expected this from me. But you know what I learned? That forgiveness is not the same as giving new opportunities for someone to hurt you. That sometimes protecting those we love requires difficult decisions." She held my father's face between her hands. "What you did or didn't do doesn't change who you are to me, to our children. You're a good man, Joseph. A man who would do anything to protect his family. And for that, I love you even more." My father lowered his head, tears now freely running down his face. "I don't deserve you, Mary." "Yes, you do," she responded firmly. "We deserve each other, and we'll overcome this together, as we've always done." I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep when they looked in our direction. That revelation changed everything, and at the same time, nothing. My father had allowed a man to die, but he had done it to protect us. It was wrong, but understandable. It was condemnable, but also, in some way, just. The next morning, we woke to knocking at the door. My father, who had probably barely slept, answered cautiously. It was Anthony. "False alarm, buddy," he said, entering the small room. "The man wasn't specifically looking for you. He's investigating a scam that's been happening with newly arrived migrants in the city. Already caught 3 families in the neighborhood." The relief we felt was so great that my mother sat down on the bed, her legs weak. My father hugged Anthony tightly, thanking him repeatedly. "How did you find out?" I asked, still suspicious after everything I had heard the night before. "The Greek told me this morning. The man came back to the store and explained better what he was looking for. Some crook has been posing as an employment agent, promising work to newcomers, collects an advance fee, and disappears with the money." We returned to Anthony's house that same morning, an enormous weight lifted from our shoulders. The ghost of the past that seemed to have caught up with us was in fact just a coincidence, a false alarm. But that episode, and especially the confession I heard my father make to my mother, changed something in me. I understood that the revenge my father had taken against my grandfather, not an act of direct violence, but a calculated omission, had brought a form of justice that the legal system probably would never provide. And I realized that even carrying the weight of that decision, he managed to move forward, to be a good father, a good husband, an honest man in all other aspects of his life. In the days that followed, I noticed my father watching me closely, as if trying to decipher if I had heard that conversation. I never mentioned the matter, neither at that moment nor in the years that followed. It was one more secret to keep, one more burden to share in silence. Our life in Chicago slowly established a new normal. My father, with his undeniable talent, was soon promoted from helper to lead carpenter. My mother managed to set up a small sewing studio in the back of the house we rented when we could finally leave the shared housing with Anthony. I finished basic studies and, encouraged by my parents, who always valued education, continued until I graduated as a teacher. Michael followed in my father's footsteps, learning the carpentry trade. Josephine, the youngest who suffered so much with the move, became a strong and determined young woman, studying nursing when that was still considered daring for a young woman from a family like ours. The shadow of what happened in that distant kitchen on a summer afternoon in 1963 never completely abandoned us. It was present in the occasional nightmares that still visited me, in the way my father startled when someone unexpectedly knocked on the door, in my mother's refusal to talk about her childhood. But we learned to live with that shadow, to integrate it into our story without allowing it to define us. The revenge my father took, if we can call what happened that, brought a tortuous form of justice. Not the clean and impartial justice of the courts, but that which sometimes emerges from the darkest corners of human experience. And although I could never fully approve of what he did, I understood why he did it. And more importantly, I understood that even good people can make terrible decisions when cornered, when those they love are in danger. This painful and complex understanding would be fundamental to what would happen next in our lives, when the silence we had kept for years finally began to show its cracks. The years passed like pages turned by the wind. The 1960s gave way to the 70s, bringing with them profound transformations in America and in our family. While the country lived through the Vietnam War and social changes, we were building our new identity in Chicago, removed from the past we left buried in that small town in Virginia. In 1973, 10 years after our arrival in the city, I was already a young teacher of 23, giving classes in elementary school in a public school in back of the yards. My days were filled with lessons in English and math, notebooks to correct, and the smiles of the children who called me Miss Teresa with an admiration that warmed my heart. Our family had prospered modestly. My father, with his exceptional skill in carpentry, managed to open his own small workshop where he worked with Michael, my brother, who was then 21. My mother maintained her sewing studio, now with 2 assistants. And Josephine, at 17, was studying nursing at a technical school, determined to follow a profession that would allow her to help others. Apparently, we had left behind the traumatic event that forced us to flee. We rarely talked about my grandfather or about what happened that summer afternoon in our old house. It was a tacit agreement among us. Move forward, look to the future, don't stir up wounds that seemed healed. But silence has its own weight. With time, it transforms into something tangible that occupies space, that infiltrates everyday conversations, that creates invisible barriers. And it was this silence that began to show its cracks on a Sunday afternoon in July 1973. We were all gathered for Sunday lunch, a tradition we maintained religiously. The plentiful table, the animated conversations, the radio playing softly, Johnny Cash in the background, a scene of family normality that we so cherished. It was then that Josephine, always the most direct among us, brought up the subject we had been avoiding for so long. "Dad," she began, placing her fork beside her plate, "why do we never visit our town? Why don't we have contact with anyone from there?" A heavy silence fell over the table. My father, now with gray hair at his temples, exchanged a quick glance with my mother. "There's nothing there to visit, Josephine," he replied after a moment, his voice deliberately casual. "But it was our land," she insisted. "I have vague memories of the house, of the backyard with the orange trees. I remember the school, the little friends. Why did we leave there so suddenly? Why do we never talk about it?" Michael, who normally stayed away from difficult conversations, surprisingly entered the discussion. "I wonder about that too sometimes. I have flashes of memory. The river where we fished, the fields where we ran. It was a good life. Why did we leave everything behind?" My parents exchanged another look, longer this time. I saw the conflict in my father's eyes, the desire to protect his children from the truth, fighting against the recognition that they deserved to know. "It was a difficult decision," my mother intervened, trying to ease the tension. "But Chicago offered better opportunities for all of you. Look where we've come. Teresa a teacher, Michael with talent for carpentry, you studying nursing. That wouldn't be possible there. There's something more, isn't there? Josephine continued, her perceptive eyes fixed on my parents' tense faces. Whenever we touch on this subject, you change the conversation. It's as if there's a ghost sitting at the table with us. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that secret I had carried for so many years. I knew the truth, or at least part of it. Since that night in the cheap hotel near Union Station when I heard my father's confession. But I had respected the silent pact of our family, never revealing what I knew. Josephine, my father finally spoke, his voice lower than normal. There are things from the past that are better left in peace. Why? She insisted, determination shining in her young eyes. What can be so terrible that we can never talk about it? We're a family. Families shouldn't have secrets like this. A bitter laugh escaped my father's lips, surprising everyone. Families are built on secrets, daughter. On the things we choose not to see, not to say, not to remember. It's what keeps us together sometimes. That's not healthy, Dad. Michael intervened with a maturity that surprised me. Whatever happened, we've been carrying this weight together for years, even without knowing exactly what it is. Maybe it's time to bring it to light. My father looked at each of us slowly, as if memorizing our faces. Then, after a long sigh, he gestured for my mother to pour more wine, the cheap wine we bought for special occasions. You're right, he finally admitted. You're adults, or almost. You deserve to know. Joseph, my mother warned, fear evident in her voice. Are you sure? He nodded gravely. Mary, we can't run from this forever. The past is always catching up to us, no matter how fast we run. And so, that Sunday afternoon, sitting at the lunch table with the remains of pot roast still on our plates, my father began to tell the story that I partially knew. He spoke about my grandfather Gerald, describing him as a difficult man, an alcoholic who had mistreated my grandmother and my mother for years. He told how, after becoming a widower and falling ill, my grandfather came to live with us against my father's initial wishes. He described how he behaved, how he drank in secret, how he made inappropriate comments. Your mother insisted we should welcome him, my father explained, his gaze fixed on the wine glass. She always had a heart bigger than resentment. My mother, sitting beside him, held his hand on the table while silent tears streamed down her face. It was the first time I saw her cry openly about this subject. What happened next, Dad? Michael encouraged, when my father made a long pause. Your grandfather? He hesitated, looking quickly at me. He wasn't a trustworthy man around women, especially young ones. I felt a tightness in my chest. It was different hearing this story being told aloud like this to people who didn't know. I realized that despite all these years, the memory of that day still had the power to affect me deeply. He tried to harm your sister, my father continued, his voice choking. Teresa was just a girl. Josephine gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide looking for mine. Michael paled, his fists involuntarily closing on the table. Fortunately, I came home early that day, my father proceeded. I had forgotten a tool. Or maybe I hadn't forgotten anything. Maybe something, some instinct, made me return. What did you do, Dad? Michael asked, his voice low and tense. My father took a sip of wine before answering. We argued. It was violent. He was drunk. He tried to hit me with a bottle. In the confusion, he fell and hit his head on the corner of the wood stove. My mother sobbed softly, and my father squeezed her hand harder. Did he die? Josephine asked directly, her nurse's eyes already assessing the severity of such an injury. Yes, my father responded simply. It was instantaneous. It was a lie. I knew that, but I understood why he told it. Some truths are too heavy to be shared completely, even with those we love. It was an accident, my mother added quickly. Your father was just defending me, defending our family. Then why didn't you tell the police? Michael questioned, confusion evident on his face. If it was self-defense? My father gave a dry laugh, without humor. Self-defense for people like us? A country bumpkin without education, without money for a lawyer, against whose word? Who would believe that the drunk old man was at fault? Who would care about what he tried to do? It was the sad reality of justice in America at that time, and perhaps still today. The law wasn't equal for all. For simple people like us, A courtroom could easily be more an arena of injustice than of redemption. "And what did you do then?" Josephine asked, her voice now softer, understanding. My mother answered this time. "We did what needed to be done. We protected our family. We told everyone that my father had decided to return to Richmond, to my brother's house." "And the body?" Michael asked hesitantly. "We buried it in the back of the property, in the orange grove," my father admitted, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. "We did what we thought was necessary to keep the family together and safe." A heavy silence fell over the table. The radio continued playing softly, a cheerful song that cruelly contrasted with the gravity of the moment. Outside, life went on. Children playing in the street, neighbors talking, the city pulsing around our small island of painful revelations. "That's why we left there," Josephine concluded, not as a question, but as a statement. "We were running away. We were starting over," my mother gently corrected. "There's a difference." We all remained silent for a long moment, each processing in our own way that revelation. It was as if a fundamental piece of the puzzle of our family history finally fit in, making visible an image we had previously only intuited. "Teresa," Michael turned to me, frowning. "Did you know all this?" All attention turned to me. I felt the weight of those curious, confused, perhaps even accusatory looks. For so many years, I had carried that secret, being the silent accomplice of my parents. "Yes," I finally admitted. "I knew. Not everything, not immediately, but I pieced it together over time." "And you never told us?" Josephine's voice carried a tone of hurt. "It wasn't my story to tell," I replied, searching for the right words. "And you were so young. Mom and Dad wanted to protect you from this burden." "How was it?" Michael suddenly asked, his eyes meeting mine with intensity. "How was it that day when he tried?" I felt a knot forming in my throat. I had never told this part in detail, not even to my parents. It was a memory I kept locked away, wrapped in layers of protective silence. It was frightening," I began, finding the words difficult to form. "He came into the kitchen when I was alone. He had been drinking, said things a girl shouldn't hear, tried to take me to his room." My voice failed, and I felt my mother's hand cover mine on the table, giving me strength to continue. "When Dad arrived, it was like an angel had appeared. I never felt so much relief in my life." "I'm sorry, Teresa," Josephine said, tears now flowing freely down her young face. "I'm sorry you went through this alone all these years." "I wasn't alone," I replied, looking at my parents. "I never was." Michael, always the most reserved of us, got up abruptly and walked around the table. To my surprise, he hugged our father tightly. A man-to-man embrace, loaded with a new understanding. "Thank you for protecting our family, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I would have had the same courage." My father, visibly moved, returned the embrace tightly. "Any father would have done the same, son." When Michael stepped away, Josephine also stood up and hugged first me, then our parents. It was as if that revealed secret, instead of separating us, had created a new kind of union between us, more honest, deeper. "Does this change anything?" my mother asked anxiously when we all sat back down. Do you see us differently now?" "I only see more clearly who you've always been," Josephine replied, with a wisdom beyond her years. "Parents who would do anything to protect their children." "But there's one thing I don't understand," Michael commented, frowning. "If it was so long ago, and if it was justified as it seems, why are we still hiding this? Who could harm us now?" My father sighed deeply. "It's not that simple, son. The law has deadlines, prescriptions, and all that. But a case like this, involving a hidden body, I don't know if we'll ever be truly free of it. Besides," my mother added, "it's not just the law that concerns us, it's the judgment. People talk, invent stories, and even if they understood, we would still be that family. Can you imagine how that would affect your lives, your jobs, your futures?" It was true. In 1970s America, a story like this could destroy reputations, close doors, create impossible stigmas to overcome. The price of silence was high, but that of public revelation could be devastating. "So, we continue to keep this secret?" Josephine asked, sounding a little disappointed. "We keep it among us," my father corrected. "It's no longer a burden that your mother, your sister, and I carry alone." Now it's ours, the family's. And perhaps it's lighter this way, shared. That afternoon marked a profound transformation in our family dynamics. The silence that had accompanied us for years didn't completely disappear. There were still subjects we avoided. There was still caution when we talked about the past in the presence of strangers. But among us, the invisible barriers that the secret had erected began to dissolve. In the weeks and months that followed, I noticed subtle changes in each one. Michael became more protective, especially of me, as if trying to compensate for not having been able to defend me when we were children. Josephine, with her training in nursing, began to study trauma psychology, seeking to better understand the marks that experiences like mine leave. My father seemed to age and rejuvenate at the same time. The weight of the secret had left permanent marks, but sharing it brought visible relief. My mother, who always carried the guilt for bringing her father into our house, finally seemed to forgive herself. As for me, I realized that despite having known the truth for years, I had never really processed what happened. Telling my part of the story aloud, being heard and believed by my entire family, had a healing power I hadn't expected. One night, a few weeks after that revealing Sunday conversation, I found my father alone on the porch of our house, smoking a cigarette, a habit he only maintained in moments of special reflection. "Can I sit with you, Dad?" I asked, approaching. He smiled, that gentle smile he always reserved for his children. "Of course, Teresa. Always." I sat in the chair beside him, observing the quiet street of back of the yards, the lights of neighboring houses, the night sky dotted with stars that were barely visible through the pollution of the big city. "Do you regret it?" I asked, after a long, comfortable silence. "Telling the truth to Michael and Josephine?" My father considered the question, taking a long drag before responding. "No," he said finally. "I think it was time. They grew up carrying a nameless ghost, feeling its presence without being able to confront it. Now at least they know what we're fighting against. And what you did." I hesitated, uncertain if I should address the subject we never discussed openly. "At the stove that day. Does it still weigh on you?" He looked at me, surprise and understanding mixed in his gaze. It was the first time I had given indications of knowing more than I should. "You heard," he stated, not as an accusation, but as an acknowledgement. "That night at the hotel, when we thought someone was looking for us, I confirmed. You were talking. You thought I was asleep." My father sighed deeply, putting out the cigarette in the small metal ashtray. "Always too observant for your own good, since you were small." We remained silent for a moment, the weight of that revelation hanging between us. "It weighs," he finally answered my question. "Every day. Not for him, I never felt guilt for him, but for myself, for what that decision did to me, for the mark it left on my soul." "Do you think God forgives you?" The question came out before I could think better. In our family, religion had always been more a matter of tradition than deep faith. But at that moment, it seemed important. "I don't know if it's forgiveness I need," my father responded thoughtfully. "I think it's more understanding. And if there's anyone who understands the motives of the human heart, it must be God." He turned to me, his eyes meeting mine in the dimness of the porch. "And you, Teresa? Do you forgive me for not arriving earlier? For dragging you away from everything you knew? For all these years of secrets?" I felt unexpected tears forming in my eyes. "There's nothing to forgive, Dad. You saved me that day, saved all of us." And there, under the starry sky of Chicago, on a simple porch of a house in back of the yards, I felt that a cycle was closing. The silence we had kept for years had finally found voice, not in public confessions or legal judgments, but in the sacred intimacy of a family that chose to face its past together. The ghost of my grandfather, who for so long had haunted our dinner table, was beginning to lose its strength. It wouldn't completely disappear. Some shadows are permanent. But now it was just that, a shadow, no longer a palpable presence controlling our lives. As America slowly walked toward a political aperture that promised more freedom, our small family also found its own process of aperture and redemption. And in that moment, with my father's hand holding mine, I knew that regardless of what the future held, we would face it together, without more secrets, without more silences, the peace we finally found. The years unfolded like a patchwork quilt after that porch conversation. some dark pieces, others bright, all sewn by the same thread of truth that now united our family. America of the 70s was changing slowly, and we changed with it, each in their own way. In 1975, 2 years after we revealed our family secret to Michael and Josephine, my life took an unexpected turn. I had dedicated myself so much to my teaching career, to my students, and to my family that I almost didn't notice when love knocked at my door in the figure of Anthony, the new principal of the school where I taught. He was a quiet man, a widower with gentle eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. We started by talking about teaching methods and pedagogical plans, but soon our conversations extended to books, music, dreams, and eventually to the scars we carried. "We all have stories we don't tell at first," he told me one afternoon as we walked through Millennium Park after a teachers' meeting. "I can see that you carry one." In another time, I would have retreated from this observation. I would have erected walls, changed the subject, created distance. The trauma of my adolescence had taught me to distrust male curiosity, to interpret any interest as potentially dangerous. But something about Anthony, perhaps the respectful way he maintained distance or how he never pressed for answers, made me trust him. After months of growing friendship, I told him my story. Not all at once, not in excessive detail, but little by little, testing his reaction to each new revelation. "Your family did what they needed to do to survive," was his only comment when I finished the narrative, without judgment in his voice, only understanding. In certain situations, there are no perfect choices, only the possible ones. We married in a simple ceremony in January 1976. My father, then 56, walked me down the aisle with a pride he could barely contain. I remember looking at him at that moment and thinking of everything he had sacrificed to protect me, to ensure that I reached that point, not only alive, but capable of loving and being loved. My mother cried throughout the ceremony, those silent tears that only mothers know how to shed, where joy and melancholy mix in proportions impossible to distinguish. Michael, already married and with a small child, was radiant beside his wife. Josephine, who had completed her nursing training and was now studying psychology, was my maid of honor. We were an ordinary family in the eyes of the guests, honest workers, united. No one could imagine the secret we shared, the silent pact that had strengthened our bonds in ways that ordinary families rarely experience. The following years were of relative tranquility. Anthony and I bought a small house in the Lincoln Square neighborhood, a bit further from the center, with a yard where we planted a mulberry tree and roses that reminded me of the ones my mother cultivated in our house in the countryside. We didn't have children, a conscious decision on my part, motivated perhaps by the unconscious fear of not knowing how to protect them in a world that I had discovered to be dangerous at a very early age. In 1979, when the country was still processing Nixon's resignation and recovering from Vietnam, my father expressed a melancholy curiosity. "I wonder if there's a statute of limitations for what I did," he asked during a Sunday lunch, his voice low so that only our family could hear. "A general pardon for the crimes of the past. That's for people who were convicted, Dad," Michael explained gently. "For people who served their time." "I know," my father replied, a sad smile on his lips. "But it would be nice, wouldn't it? An official paper saying that it's all forgiven, that we can move forward without looking back." I realized at that moment that despite the apparent acceptance, my father had never found complete peace with his actions. The weight of that day, of that decision made in an instant of anger and protection, still curved his shoulders even when he smiled. It was in 1980, with my father's health beginning to decline due to heart problems, that we made a decision that would again change the course of our lives. For years, we had avoided any mention of our hometown, as if the simple act of pronouncing its name could conjure ghosts we preferred to keep dormant. "I want to visit our land before I die," my father announced one night, surprising us all. "I want to see what's left. I want to make peace with that place." My mother, who always supported his decisions, this time hesitated. "Joseph, don't you think it's dangerous after so long?" "Almost 20 years have passed, Mary," he argued, his voice weaker than it used to be, but still carrying that determination that always characterized him. If anyone still remembers us, they must have their own theories about why we left. And if anyone knew what happened, they would have come after us long ago. There was logic in his reasoning, but also a deeper desire that we all recognized. The yearning of an elderly man for reconciliation, not just with a place, but with his own past. Let's all go, I suggested, to my own surprise. Like a family trip to face it together, as we've always done. Michael and Josephine immediately agreed. Anthony, who had become an integral part of our family and guardian of our secret, offered to drive. Only my mother remained fearful, her eyes revealing a deep fear that words couldn't completely express. "What if he's still there?" she whispered to me when we were alone preparing food for the trip. "In the ground where we buried him?" I understood her concern. As irrational as it seemed, it was as if she feared that my grandfather's body had somehow been preserved, waiting to accuse my father, to expose our secret to the world. "Mom," I responded softly, holding her trembling hands between mine. "After so long, nothing remains but bones, and even those the earth must have reclaimed. Nature has its own cycles of forgiveness." She nodded, not entirely convinced, but willing to try. For my father, for all of us. We left on an extended weekend in July 1980. Winter in Virginia was mild compared to the cutting cold of Chicago, but enough to require warm clothing during the trip. Our small convoy, Anthony's car carrying me, my parents, and Josephine, and Michael's transporting his wife and 5-year-old son, followed the highway that led to Virginia, gradually moving away from the pollution and frantic rhythm of the city. The trip was silent, loaded with expectations and apprehensions. As we approached the region where we were born, I began to recognize elements of the landscape. The undulating hills covered with plantations, the yellow birch trees that dotted the roads, the sky of such an intense blue that it seemed unreal after years living under the gray haze of Chicago. "Everything's different," my father commented, looking out the window with a mixture of fascination and nostalgia. And at the same time, the same. It was true. The roads were now paved. Electricity poles accompanied the way. Billboards announced products that didn't even exist when we left. But the essence remained. That unique combination of earth smell, open horizons, and a rhythm of life that the big city could never replicate. When we finally arrived at our old town, it was already late afternoon. The sun was setting behind the church in the central square, bathing the simple houses with a golden light that seemed to come out of a dream. We parked near the square, and for a moment, no one had the courage to get out of the car. "So many memories," my mother murmured, her eyes watery. It was Matthew, Michael's small son, who broke the spell. "Grandpa, is this where you and Grandma were born?" he asked, with the innocence characteristic of children. "Can I see where your house was?" My father smiled, a new determination appearing in his gaze. "Of course you can, my little one. Let's all see." Our old house was about a mile from town, on a dirt road that now seemed much shorter than in my childhood memory. When we saw it, we all fell silent. The simple brick construction was still there, now painted a faded yellow instead of the blue we knew. The yard where we played had been fenced in, and the orange trees, including the one under which my grandfather had been buried, had been replaced by a small garden. "Someone lives here?" Michael stated the obvious, noticing clothes hanging on the line and a child's bicycle leaning against the porch. "We can't just invade the property," Josephine observed, always the most cautious of us. We were about to discuss what to do when the front door opened and a middle-aged woman appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She observed us with the natural suspicion of someone who sees strangers, stopped in front of her house. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, keeping her distance. My father stepped forward, taking off his hat as a sign of respect. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. My name is Joseph Oliver. This was our house many years ago, before we moved to Chicago. We're just revisiting some memories." The woman's expression immediately changed from wariness to surprise, and then to something like recognition. "Oliver, the carpenter?" she asked, approaching the gate. "My husband bought this property in 64 or 65. Talked a lot about you all, said you left suddenly that no one understood why." My heart accelerated. This was the moment we feared. Questions for which we had no acceptable answers. "A job opportunity in Chicago," my mother intervened smoothly. Difficult decisions, but necessary. The woman nodded, apparently accepting that explanation. My husband got the house and part of the furniture, said they were the best he'd ever seen, made by blessed hands. My father smiled genuinely, touched by the compliment. I remember your husband, honest man, paid a fair price for the property. It was a white lie. There was never a formal sale. We simply abandoned everything in our flight, but a necessary one to keep the conversation on safe ground. Would you like to come in, see how it is now? The woman offered, to our surprise. My parents exchanged glances. A silent communication that I perfectly understood after all these years. It would be an honor, my father replied for all of us. The house had been modified inside. Walls torn down, rooms reorganized, modernizations that reflected the passage of time, but I could still feel the echoes of our life there. The place where the wood stove had been, now replaced by a gas one. The room I shared with Josephine, transformed into a sewing room. The porch where my father used to sit on summer nights watching the stars. I was drawn to the back of the property, to the location where the orange grove used to be. As I had told my mother, nothing remained there that could tell our story. The terrain had been completely transformed, the past literally buried under beds of lettuce, carrots, and tomatoes. Looking for something? Anthony asked, joining me in the yard. Just confirming that some things are better when left behind, I replied, squeezing his hand in mine. We stayed about an hour, talking with the new owner, hearing about the changes in town, telling edited versions of our life in Chicago. When we left, there was a lightness in my father that I hadn't seen in years, as if a part of the burden he carried had finally been deposited in the place to which it belonged. On the way back to town, we decided to stop at the small local cemetery. My father wanted to visit the grave of his parents, my paternal grandparents, who died even before I was born. As we walked among the simple headstones, I noticed how he seemed at peace, as if he were completing a necessary cycle. When we returned to our small hotel in town, we all sat on the porch for afternoon coffee. My father, looking younger than in the previous weeks, looked at each of us before speaking. "Thank you for accompanying me on this journey," he said, his voice choked with emotion. For many years, I thought I could never again set foot on this land without feeling the weight of what happened. But today, seeing all of you here, I realize that we did the right thing. Not just on that day, but on all the days that followed, keeping our family together, protecting each other, building an honest life despite everything. "There's nothing to thank us for, Dad," Michael replied, speaking for all of us. "We are who we are because of the choices you and Mom made, including the difficult ones." Josephine, always the most emotional, had tears in her eyes. This trip made me understand something important. What happened here didn't define us, at least not completely. It was just the beginning of a larger story, one we're still writing together. That night, staying in a small-town hotel, I slept better than I had in years. There were no nightmares, no startles, just a deep and restorative sleep, as if that land, which for so long I had associated only with trauma and flight, had finally offered me some kind of absolution. We returned to Chicago the next day, each carrying a renewed understanding of our shared past. For my father, the trip seemed to bring a peace that no formal confession or absolution could provide. In the months that followed, I noticed how he seemed lighter, more present, as if he had finally allowed himself to live fully in the present without the constant looking back. When he passed away peacefully in his bed in March 1983, at 63, there was a serene expression on his face that comforted me deeply. He departed reconciled with his past, with his choices, with the life he had built from the ashes of a tragedy. At the funeral, as I watched the coffin descend into the earth, I thought about the many layers of our family history, about how one act of violence almost destroyed a girl, and how another act of violence, terrible but necessary, ended up saving her. About how secrets can be both prisons and protections, about how forgiveness of oneself, of others, of life, is perhaps the most important work we do as humans. My mother survived my father by almost a decade, keeping herself active and present in the lives of the grandchildren she loved so much. When she departed in 1992, it was as if a final chapter had been closed. She was the last person who had been present in that kitchen on that fateful day that altered the course of our lives. Today, at 75, I am the final guardian of this story. Michael left us 5 years ago, victim of the same heart problem that took our father. Josephine lives in Virginia, dedicated to her patients and to volunteer work with women victims of violence, a direct legacy of our own family experience. I finally decided to share our story, not to shock or scandalize, but because I believe there are important lessons in it about protection, about family, about how the choices we make in moments of crisis can echo through generations. If you've come this far on this journey with me, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy to revisit these memories, but I feel it's necessary. If this story touched you in some way, I ask that you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Each new subscriber gives me strength to continue sharing these real-life stories that often remain hidden behind smiles in yellowed photographs. The past cannot be changed, but it can be understood, accepted, and eventually forgiven. That's what my father learned on that last visit to our hometown. That's what my mother practiced silently every day by accepting her own father despite everything. And that's what I try to do now by sharing our story with you. Because in the end, I believe that the peace we finally found didn't come from forgetting or denial, but from the courage to look the past straight in the eye, to accept its shadows and its lights, and to consciously choose to move forward, transformed, but not defined by what we left behind.